Good morning, everyone. I think you're all here to hear Jerry Schnoor and not me, so I'll make my intro brief. You can read it here. He's got a load of accolades and things that he does, and he's known internationally for his work in the field of climate science and engineering. And we welcome with us this morning Dr. Gerald Schnoor.
Thank you, Chris.
Is that on?
It is now, I think. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks for inviting me and all the correspondence too. In the spirit of true Lutherans, I see that nobody really wants to sit up front, so I may come out to greet you and to meet you, except for Sophie. You get credit. Chris asked that we talk a little bit about climate change. Being here is really great for me. Clay Monsrud, Clay and Adele are great friends and just showed me around the new part of the facility here, and it's fantastic. And I'm just down the way at Zion Lutheran, my wife Jana and I, and really nice to be here. And thanks for inviting me. Next slide, please.
Okay.
This is the Earth that we're trying to protect, and when you have a thin veneer called an atmosphere clinging to the sides of the Earth, pulled by gravity, actually, it's actually so small you can't see that thin veneer called atmosphere. It's view from space. That's a pretty small compartment, a pretty small reservoir. And we're now at 8 billion people, believe it or not, on Earth. And the last time I checked, $94 trillion economy. When you have all those people and all that activity, that means you are releasing a lot of air pollution. And some of the gases, the so-called greenhouse gases, are radiatively important. That means they change the energy budget as the sun's energy comes in and strikes the Earth. And that's the problem, actually. It's a top-down warming from the atmosphere to the oceans and the land, as we see here. Next. I'm sure you read about it. There was a new report last year. It's called AR6, the sixth report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations. And that report, according to the Secretary General, Guterres, was a code red for humanity. That we really have to act, and we have to act now, maybe within the next decade, in order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. It's here now, but it's going to get much, much worse in terms of extreme events and warmer temperatures if we don't begin to act to decrease our emissions. The atmosphere, the ocean, the ice, and the biosphere have all changed, as shown in red here. And the observed changes have resulted in extreme heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts, tropical cyclones, and all of that has changed just since the last report 9 years ago in 2013. So climate change is here, and it's getting worse. Surprisingly, at least to most people, the greenhouse gas concentrations, the most important one, carbon dioxide, has never been this high in the past 2 million years. So it's definitely due to us. It's happening really fast. Other greenhouse gas concentrations we know have never been this high in at least 800,000 years. So this is some experiment we're running, some unprecedented experiment. Next one, Chris. The red arrows are the carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. The big one on the left, going up, all the fossil fuels, the coal has been around for 340 million years in the Earth's crust forming from a time when we had a warmer atmosphere due to the continents being in a different location than they are now. And we're burning up fossil fuels that took 340 million years to form. We're burning them up in a couple hundred years. And whenever you do that, that thin veneer called an atmosphere, you're going to change the energy budget, and we have. So the red arrow going up is the carbon dioxide from burning the fossil fuels, and the other red arrow going up is for changing land use, destroying tropical forests, clearing land, and opening up soils from agriculture. Those red arrows are bigger than the black arrows coming down, which are going to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere into forming biomass, especially woody biomass of trees and roots. And the other black arrow on the far right side is the carbon dioxide, which is a weak acid, absorbing into the oceans. The red arrows being bigger than the black arrows means you're going to have, that means inputs are greater than outputs. In is greater than out. So we're going to have an accumulation. And the accumulation is the atmosphere. About 16 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide is accumulating. We're using it as a blowdown for our exhaust. And it's not that we're ever running out of fossil fuels. We have plenty of fossil fuels for a couple hundred more years. It's that we're running out of a place to put the exhaust from the fossil fuels. If we don't put it in the atmosphere where it's accumulating, we're going to have to deep six it into deep geologic disposal, if we can do that safely. And that hasn't really been proven on a large scale yet. We can talk about that and carbon pipelines at the end if we want. Next one. Our emissions also have just gone steadily up ever since the Industrial Revolution in the end of the 1700s, when the steam engine was invented and we started to burn large quantities of coal. And it's still going up in our lifetime, 1990 to 2020 on this slide, up, up, up. Well, you can see the Great Recession of 2007 as a small blip down, and you can see the pandemic in 2020, 21, 22 as a small blip down at the end of the graph, but we've popped right back up again. And what we need to do is the blue line coming down in order to stabilize the atmosphere and the climate. We need our emissions to come down by 45% in the next 8 years, by 2030. So that's a tall order. Next. That results in, those emissions result in steadily rising carbon dioxide concentrations, which are now up to 420 parts per million. And it's not the only greenhouse gas, there's several, but it's still the most important one, about 2/3 of the total radiative effect, the effect on energy. Next one. And because the energy balance has been changed on Earth, that means that the temperature eventually will respond. And it looks like the signal emerged from the noise. There's variations from year to year. We call that interannual variability. But it looks like that signal began to emerge from the noise about 1980. And the 80s were warmer than any decade before, the 90s warmer than that, and 2000s and so on. And so we're steadily climbing in average temperature, averaged over the whole planet, over all the seasons. And we're now at about 1.16 degrees Celsius warmer. That's about 2.1 degrees Fahrenheit warmer over the whole planet, if you can imagine that. And that's the amount of climate change so far. If we don't decrease our emissions, it just keeps going, getting warmer and warmer. So eventually, we have to, we will. I'm convinced we will, as everyone sees the ramifications of not beginning to transition out of the fossil fuel age. Thanks. Our son, Jenna, and we have a son, Ben, in California, and his family has been evacuated twice. They're in Monterey, in the hills behind Monterey, and evacuated twice. And Cal Fire is really amazing, you guys, what they're able to do. They've saved his neighborhood twice already. Thank heavens they haven't been burned out. But now, recently, you know, in addition, they have the atmospheric rivers coming from the Pacific Ocean, Hawaii area, just tremendous rainfall, believe it or not, and winds. Ben says that it's the winds that really scares him the most. This was the wildfire, which has now been succeeded. Wildfire last year along, you may recognize the Coastal Highway, Highway number 1, Pacific Coast Highway. And now we've got the mudslides, which have followed the forest fires shown here. Unprecedented events in terms of their severity and the length. The fire season is almost all year now. Starts earlier, lasts longer, and more intense wildfires. Next one. And other events. For us, it's been the derechos, and previous to that, flooding, but just a couple recent ones was Hurricane Ian in Florida. In terms of damages, unprecedented hurricane. They spin up faster because the ocean is warmer too. It's about 1 degree Fahrenheit warmer at the surface, and we can follow that temperature signal down 2,000 meters very clearly. So the oceans are warming as a result of this top-down warming, first in the atmosphere due to like a blanket, the greenhouse gases warming the atmosphere, and then it transfers down. 93% of the heat ends up in the oceans. So that's where you want to really look for the effects of climate change. Atmospheric rivers in California, I already mentioned. This is ice melting mentioned in the AR6 report at the outset today. Actually shown here on the left was a friend of mine, Conrad Stefan. Connie was a scientist at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and I got to know him well as on sabbaticals there. And he invited me actually to go to the Swiss camp. And I told Jen, I think I'm too old to go to the Swiss camp. And Connie died there in August of 2020. It was a snow fog, and he accidentally fell down on one of these moulins, one of these crevasses, and into the freezing water. But all he was trying to do was just measure what's the amount of water coming off of Greenland each year. And he was really the first to try to do that. And the answer is, by the way, about half of Lake Erie. About half of the volume of Lake Erie is melting off of Greenland each year. And it's adding to the sea level rise. About half of our sea level rise is because the sea is getting warmer. I mentioned that. Water expands as it gets warmer. And about half of it is due to the runoff of all these glaciers melting all around the world. And this is what's really getting worse at the moment, is the meltwater increase. Next one. Oops.
Too far.
Well, it's just going to, thanks, Chris. I was just going to mention that Antarctica is even more ice. And it's very surprising because the one on the right is in East Antarctica. And last year, now we know that that's unstable as well. We used to think only West Antarctica was being undercut by warmer seas again at the base of the ice shelf. And the ice shelf is kind of balanced up on the land on Antarctica, and they're falling into the ocean. It's not any one iceberg falling in that makes a big difference. It's that allows the glaciers to keep flowing, and they are flowing at glacial speed. And when the ice shelves break off, they can flow more freely. And if there was a sudden change, and it's possible, we call that abrupt climate change. And we could see very rapid changes in sea level rise on the order of a decade. We haven't experienced that so far, but that's one of the concerns about climate change. Thwaites in West Antarctica on the left is just another indication. It's called the Doomsday Glacier because it's thought to be the most vulnerable to falling in suddenly. And it would cause an immediate 3.3 meter, not immediate, but over a few years, 3.3 meter rise in sea level, 3.3 meters. Next one. Well, again, I mentioned that where's all the heat going? How do we really know we're warming? For a long time, we sent up satellites in the 90s and 2000s. It's called a series of satellites, CERES, with the idea of measuring accurately the energy budget change that we've been talking about. And because of the clouds and the variability from year to year and place to place, so dynamic, we really haven't been able to do it that way. It wasn't until 2005 that we figured out where's the heat capacity the greatest. Well, clearly the oceans, they're massive. So if you want to know where all the heat is going, you've got to go to the oceans. And since 2005, we did that. Part of the Argo program, of which the United States participates. It's a big international program. And we know for sure that the oceans are warmer. You can see the signal going from the top down, a little more than a degree Fahrenheit warmer at the top, and going all the way. These program dives, the Argo has sondes or floats. They come up and recharge their batteries in the sun about every 7 to 10 days, and then go through a programmed dive and measure very carefully the temperature, salinity, pressure, and all the way down to 2,000 meters or more. We have some that go 6,000 meters now. The heat that is being added kind of knocks your socks off. I have my students make this calculation. It's equal to about 7 Hiroshima bombs, the heat content, from 7 Hiroshima bombs going off every second, 24/7, 365 days a year. That's how much heat is being added by this greenhouse blanket over the atmosphere. It's incredible. And I also have them calculate, well, how much heat is liberated from just burning the fossil fuels? Because that adds heat too. Digging up fossil fuels that have been there millions of years. But that's less than 5% of the total warming. So this change in the energy effect due to the greenhouse gases, it's a big deal. Next one. The diagram on the right, I apologize, it's busy, but it's meant to impress in the sense that these are all the manifestations of the model runs all around the world that the IPCC, the United Nations Governmental Panel on Climate Change, is following. And business as usual is kind of those red lines. On the y-axis is the emissions, global emissions, and on the x-axis is time since 1980. And it looks like right now we're following something akin to the kind of orange-yellow ones. Do you see those? We're leveling off global emissions, and we're kind of following that scenario into the future. That's about all you can do, is make a projection based on how things are going now. And if we do that, we'll end up much, much warmer than we are now. Even though emissions are beginning to go down, we'll end up about 2.7 degrees Celsius. That's 4.8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by the end of the century. Now remember, we've only experienced 1 degree Celsius so far, about 2 degrees Fahrenheit so far. So we're talking about more than doubling that change. Next one. So, what can we do? We're entering the happy part of the story now. Just wanted you to know in case you didn't recognize it. we already have the, thank goodness, and we have some successes. One success to point to is the Montreal Protocol, which stemmed the Freon chemicals, big international agreement, academia, industry, governments, all involved together in figuring that out. And we have responded, and we indeed, the Freon chemicals are decreasing, and the hole is the stratospheric ozone hole is stabilizing. Hopefully it will begin to really decrease greatly. The other side of that story is that if we hadn't done that, it turns out that those same chemicals that destroy the ozone in the stratosphere, which protects us from ultraviolet radiation, that's cataracts and skin cancer, the same chemicals would now be more important than carbon dioxide in terms of greenhouse gases. They're also greenhouse gases. So, I mean, we really saved ourselves in the international treaty from 1988. It can be done. But now we need to have that kind of action on greenhouse gases and climate change. We can mitigate, we can adapt. Most of all, we have to collaborate better than we're doing in our country and worldwide as well. Jan and I were at the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. It was amazing when every country signed it, some with trepidations, but every country signed that agreement, that we were all on the same page, that climate change is very serious, action has to be taken, and everybody agreed to do that. The trouble has been with the political will to carry through on that. It calls for a 45% emission and reductions by 2030. Oh, that's going to be rough. We haven't even completely leveled them off yet, let alone that blue line going down. And then net zero, completely transition out of fossil fuels by 2050. I tell my students it's been a good run. You know, for 200 years, we've powered everything, we've built everything, we've manufactured everything, we've transported everything with fossil fuels. It's been a good run, but it's got to end. And in ending it, the good news is it's going to create millions and millions of jobs. It is the economic opportunity. It is the economic engine for the future. Our students and our kids, that is what's going to be the driver for the future. And it's going to be a much, much better world. Some of the positive things are listed on the left-hand side of the slide. One of our University of Iowa students is in charge of the Global Methane Hub, Marcelo Mena. I don't know if you remember him or not, Kevin, but he is now head of the International Global Methane Hub, charged with low-hanging fruit, trying to really, decrease the methane leaks from gas line fracking and gas operations. We think we can do this and get a big improvement in climate change quite rapidly for very low cost. The Green Climate Fund, you know, the countries that are feeling this the most, Iowa, we're kind of protected here in the middle of the continent. The countries who are feeling it the most have done the least to cause climate change. We have to reach out and try to help them with their problems so that they too can be a part of this change, this transition out of the fossil fuel age. One of the things they want the most, and it came up in Sharm el-Sheikh this past November, one of the things they want the most is they feel like they're already having to abandon islands. Some of the island nations are already having to purchase food because of drought. And the most vulnerable countries say they need a loss and damage facility. The United States has been one of the most reticent. They're afraid of lawsuit type operations coming unabated due to the loss, because there are loss and damages already. And so this last meeting was all about money. And money is where probably the least progress is being made, partly because of the pandemic, as you can imagine. There's so much need. Just look at Syria and Turkey today with the earthquake. Look at Pakistan. 30% of Pakistan was completely flooded last year. 30% of the country. It's estimated $80 billion of damage. They don't have that kind of money. They already have the payment on their loans so far for aid is $3 billion a year. And they don't know how they're going to raise that. And interest rates are going up. Next one. That's called the debt trap for vulnerable countries. What has happened is, in Pakistan, they have an immediate need for $32 billion because of the flood damages caused by climate change. We do attribution studies. We know that 60% of that storm was due to the change in climate that we've had. And so they're already feeling it. They did very little to cause it. And they have a serviceable debt of $3 billion and interest rates are going up. So they're in a debt trap. They can't get out. They can't respond to this program, this international program that's needed to respond to climate change. Next. One of the good things that has happened, and you probably read about it, was just last fall in Montreal, Canada, there was another treaty signed, and that's the Biodiversity Treaty. And they agreed for the first time that to preserve species, we're losing species at an alarming rate. Within, let's say, our kids' lifetime, we're talking about 1 million species lost. We don't even know how many species we have. The best estimate I put over here in the lower right is about 8.7 million species. We're losing about 1 million in the next generation. And once they're gone, they're gone. That's it. Forget Jurassic Park. We don't have any DNA zoos that we're keeping track of. Couldn't afford to. Anyway, once those species are gone, of all the change that we've talked about, the most irreversible is biodiversity loss. And so this treaty is a big one because all the countries agreed again that 30% of the land could be protected in a smart way using corridors to preserve species. 30% of the land and 30% of the marine area should be protected. And everybody agreed 30-30 by 2030. And most of the problem is not climate change here, although it does contribute, especially with coral reef decline, that we can talk about that. But most of it is due to habitat loss, just the clearing of land, and there's no place for the animals and plants to live. And so that's a good news thing that we've agreed to start to respond to that, to put together preservations, parks, different kinds of operations to preserve these species. Next. So what are we going to do? For climate change, we need, you've probably heard this before, we need to kind of electrify everything, pretty much everything. And we'll still have some use of fossil fuels. It's going to take a long time to replace aviation fuel. That could be an opportunity for Iowa to make sustainable green biofuels. It could be. We're not doing that right now with corn ethanol, but use renewable power, wind, solar, and nuclear. I don't think you can rule it out. I think you can rule it out for the 2030, the 45% decline, because we can't even cite them fast enough for that. But certainly we should look to a low carbon energy source, and you can't rule nuclear out for the long-term future. It would be modular, more safe, impossible for meltdowns like what we have so far. Electric vehicles, battery storage, vehicle to grid. You know, we have 240 million cars in the US. If every car had a storage battery in it, and you could connect into the grid, when you weren't driving, say you're at work, you could put energy into the grid. That would allow the baseline battery savings for wind and solar, which are intermittent. And then at night, when you fill up, when there's very little demand, you can take that energy back. So we think vehicle to grid is one of the ways to get a lot of storage. We can get, for the geeks out there, 600 gigawatts of storage. That's a lot of power plants just from battery storage in cars. 500,000 public charging stations are needed. Smart grid and price. We need to weatherize our homes. We have really old housing stock in Iowa. And that's going to be lots of jobs created just by refurbishing and renewing our housing stock. And the Inflation Reduction Act is a good news thing too. Next one, Chris. If you would have told me when I first started teaching about this in 1990, that in the US, the richest country in the world, we would not have comprehensive energy legislation or comprehensive climate legislation in 2023, I would have said, you're crazy. Of course we're going to have that. But in fact, we haven't. And the very first, what I would call climate change law is misnomered, perhaps. It's the Inflation Reduction Act. 750 pages long. It's huge. There's so many provisions in there, but $369 billion provided for climate change response. You know, these days you can't do, when I was going to school, it was all about regulations. We had the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, thou shalt not. And it worked. It cost money, but it worked. Now you can't do that. This is one big chalk bill full of carrots. No sticks. We can't pass sticks anymore. We can talk about why together, but no sticks. It's all incentives. And if we take advantage of those incentives, it will work. It'll make our emissions in this country come down from what looks like it would be by 2030, 20% decline off of 2005 to about 40%. So double, not the goal from the United Nations, but close to the goal for the United Nations. It involves home energy rebates. It involves wind power, mostly offshore wind power is what is incentivized. Biodiesel, green biodiesel with very low carbon impact, aviation fuels, hydrogen, and so on. Thanks. It involves a 30% tax credit for residential solar panels, but everything has to do with, there are qualifications, and it's especially incentivized for disadvantaged people, poor communities, and people of color, which have been ignored for so long in terms of Cancer Alley and all of the redlining and stuff that has gone on to disadvantage those people. I added it all up. An average household, if you took advantage of everything, would save $28,000. Not everybody needs solar cells or can do that, but it's just chock full of incentives. Next one. And there's stuff for farmers too. Like it or not, $20 billion for farmers to rotate their crops and to use cover crops more. We've had very active farm community. Whenever the state has had a program, this provides a lot more federal money for that kind of, hopefully, improvement in our soil quality, putting carbon back into the soil, and improving our water quality as well. The carbon storage provision has changed from $51 a ton to $85 a ton. Some people are going to get rich if they can manage these carbon pipelines. At $85 a ton, you'll be able to pay for that pipeline in a year or two with that kind of rate of return. But again, it would incentivize, if we can't put it in the atmosphere for reasons we talked about, and we got it, and we still are using some fossil fuels, we got to then put it in the next best place, which is deep geologic storage. That's what the pipelines are all about. We can talk about that too. I think last slide. Oh, second to last. So really, truly, if we respond to this transition out of fossil fuel, first of all, it's inevitable. We are going to have to. It's very clear. We can't just get hotter and hotter and hotter, more and more storms, the damages will be far greater than any cost. They are already, to be honest with you. And so it's going to be a much better future. It's going to be cleaner air. Can you imagine looking across Grand Canyon, seeing for 100 miles, not 40 miles like is the best today you can do right now? Can you imagine almost no childhood asthma because it's caused mostly by fine particulate matter? That'll be gone. Clean air, blue skies, better, a fairer, more equitable society, and lots of jobs as the engine for clean, sustainable development. It comes down to, and I know you've talked about it here at Gloria Day, it comes down to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we're falling behind on too, due to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and all the things that have developed. But we're really talking about improving the entire human condition. So we need climate action now. We need to mitigate and adapt for a better world. We have to adapt because it's going to get warmer. It's going to get warmer before this kicks in. So things are going to get worse before they get better. We have to adapt. And there's, again, a lot of high quality jobs in doing that. And the only thing I'd leave you with is a lot of good things are happening. Look at the wind in Iowa alone. What a success story. A lot of good things are happening. They just need to happen a little bit faster. We need to move faster in order to respond to this problem. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. And if we have time, no, I don't want to show those.
Okay.
Too complicated. Any questions? Yes.
I don't know if you know the schedule of the adult forum here, but last week we had a political scientist here, and a big chunk of your presentation had a political application to achieve these goals. And last week, and I'm probably oversimplifying and people can help correct, but it was like he wasn't too worried. You know, you don't have to worry about changing too quickly if you don't like the way the decisions are made in the next election. Do that. And here we're looking at 2030, and it was like, we don't have very many elections in 2030. And, you know, I've heard you before, this is every bit as alarming as the last time. So the political side.
But there was a happy part at the end, right?
So with understanding how to change, you know, there isn't a lot of push in the state of Iowa now. I'm a lifetime Iowan. I've never seen it, you know, with the current political climate that we have now. But boy, I would love to have farmers and everybody, electric cars, everybody working together for these goals.
Amen, brother. I agree with you. You know, it's kind of part of the imperceptible present. Climate change moves slowly enough, and we are a little bit sheltered here in Iowa, save for the floods and the derechos. But we are a little, you know, you don't realize that there are countries that are facing existential crisis. I mean, they're having to move off of islands where people are located. They have failing crops. They have a failing economy. And we're part of that because we need them to be a part of the solution too. And so we're going to have to help. That's the hardest part right now is the money, to be honest with you. I think everybody agrees on what needs to be done, but as you correctly point out, the political will to do it. And that usually has to do with ching, 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 the money. The money isn't flowing and isn't coming. And there's reasons for it. It's not for lack of goodwill. It's for the needs are great right now. Yes.
Yeah, the pipeline, CO2 pipeline. So I'm trying to wrap my head around this thing and looking at sort of a life cycle analysis. In the end, if you balance that out, is it really doing something? Because, well, first of all, if you have the pipeline already built, you're pushing it down there in the ground, is it going to stay there? You know, that's a question.
We haven't done it on a full scale, so I would say We don't know for sure.
And the other thing is that part of the reason for this is to help fracking be more efficient, if you will, bringing up more.
It'll lower their carbon footprint.
Totally.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know if it will or not, but I mean, at least it's going to put more fossil fuels up to be used.
Oh. Well, of course, the pipelines in Iowa all claim they're not going to be used in that way, but I would have some reservations about that, as do you. I'm sort of agnostic on the pipeline question, and here's why. And there's no right answer. Take it as you will. If we're going to have corn ethanol, more than half our crop, as you know, we're talking about 6 million acres of land devoted to corn ethanol, a transportation fuel. You could make a lot more transportation fuel by putting solar panels on that land. A lot more, and more profit too. Let's not go there, just having said that. But if we're going to have it corn ethanol in the future, and there's a lot of impetus for that politically in Iowa, then it's the best place to capture CO2 that I know of. My students and I right now are trying to capture CO2 at the Burlington Street power plant. And the carbon dioxide coming out of there is 14%. And very hot, very difficult to do. The carbon dioxide coming out of a fermentation plant like a corn ethanol plant is 90% pure CO2. Very easy just to put that under pressure, liquefy it, put it into a pipeline, and take it somewhere, notwithstanding your other question. So if we're going to have corn ethanol in the future, we got to lower the emissions. The carbon footprint's too high. We got to lower the emissions. And the only way that I know to lower the emissions is to do a pipeline and deep six. So that's the case for. The case against would be if you lower their carbon footprint, the pipeline companies, the frackers, the oil and gas companies with record profits, if you lower they're going to become more profitable, and presumably it's going to make the industry last longer on fossil fuels. That's a big negative in my viewpoint. So by doing this pipeline solution, you're helping the oil and gas companies and the ethanol plants in a mighty big way. $85 a ton, that's a huge payment. We're talking billions of dollars will go to them. And that'll prosper some Iowans, not too many, but some. So I tried to lay out the pros and the cons as I see it.
How can we make the economic case? Because some politicians will listen to money. And how can we make the economic case to farmers to convince them that these sustainable practices are actually more profitable? And if they allowed solar panels to be and wind turbines to be on their land, they could make better money, and their expenses are going through the roof right now.
I'd be interested in what you all think about that, because I was very surprised and confused by like the Palo nuclear power plant went, they want to put a big solar farm there on about 4,000 acres, and there was so much opposition. It really surprised me because, as you said, Chris, we're talking about you're going to make way more money. And the farmers are against it for reasons I don't understand. Maybe you can tell me. Some of the stated reasons were they don't want it doesn't ruin the land. In fact, you lay it fallow so the carbon can improve the land. Actually, you can even farm a little bit underneath it. That's another story. But they say they if they want to buy more, they need to continuously buy more land in their view. And if the next door neighbor has a big solar farm next to them, they can't expand like they'd like to. That was one of the reasons. They don't want, and of course, the more altruistic reason is they don't want to see precious Iowa farmland, almost the best in the world, going to an industrial operation. But in fact, corn ethanol is an industrial operation.
And they are ruining the land by not rotating and not doing cover crops. They're depleting soil.
I agree with you. Yes.
too bad with that increased profits that we could split that.
Oh, that's cool. I wish you would have talked to Biden before the Inflation Reduction Act. Yes.
Yeah, just shifting gears a little bit, going back to what you were saying about the nuclear power. We're talking about that, how you didn't see that as a short-term solution. I believe that's mostly talking about new construction and stuff like that. But what do you see then for the role for license extension for existing ones that are going to be forced offline in the next 10 years or so by virtue of that?
It seems like, I would say 20 years ago, it looked like everybody wanted to extend their license as long as they could, as long as it was safe. They could get the license. Now it seems like people are shutting them down much faster. I'm not sure of all the economics going on there. It looks like it's declining. Nuclear power is declining. We now have zero in Iowa, zero in our energy mix. Cordova plant is gone. Palo plant is gone. We're strictly now wind and coal. Do it? Yes.
Yeah, and so all of the panels that we need, the batteries and so on require a lot of precious elements, and so on and so forth. But all of that, there are mining problems.
It's unsustainable.
Unintended consequences. So
In my class, all of the lithium and niobium and all the rare earth elements, it's all unsustainable in the sense that it's non-renewable. And we're limiting opportunities for future generations as a result of it. But if we learn how to recycle, the circular economy, then you can overcome that argument. When we did Tesla, I have friends who say we should have never allowed Tesla even to develop, though they showed the way of how to do electric vehicles, because we didn't know how we were going to recycle their batteries. We still don't. Well, they're just now coming to us, that the batteries have to be recycled. And they now have about a 40 or 50% recycle rate, but we're just now figuring out how to recycle them. At the end of the life of a Tesla, the battery still will hold 70% of charge. 70% of that's not enough for a vehicle, but 70% of charge can be used, say, as a used battery at a power plant, at a wind substation, to save wind power. So there's things we can do in a circular economy that hopefully will minimize. Maybe that's a bad word, but decrease the impact of all these metals that we need for this new economy. And you raise a great point.
Tesla has a recycle plant operating now, do they not?
Yes, I think it's in California.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what should we be doing right now? Weatherizing our homes?
Yes, definitely. Everything you can do to decrease your own carbon footprint, it does, it starts with us and it does make a difference. Yes.
And should we rush out and get an electric vehicle?
I wouldn't rush out and get an electric vehicle, no, but that is the trend, the way it's going. We're going to electrify everything. You don't need to change your gas stove yet.
I don't have enough.
All my chef friends, my foodie friends, they love their gas stove.
Yeah.
They're never going to change.
Yes, dryer, everything. Just electric dryers work great.
Well, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it.